Hello, everybody, and welcome to Political Power Ranker, our post-election edition. And let's bring in Spencer Kimball because Spencer's going to be on the hot seat. We're going to look at his numbers versus what actually happened. And Spencer, a little tease here. I think you did okay.
Uh, Predictably, we did just fine. But let's get into those numbers because I really worry about the margins.
Let's do that. But first, let's bring in Dan Manarino. Dan is the political anchor at WPIX TV in New York City. Dan's been with us for the ride with his cohort in crime and covering politics, Henry Rossoff, throughout this race. Dan, glad to have you again.
Great to be back. Looking forward to talking about all the things that happened. And yeah, I will say, Spencer, you called it.
From the beginning.
I like this group.
From the beginning. All right. So what are we doing today? First of all, we are going coast to coast. We've got analysis from New York to California on the big races. We're going to throw in Virginia and New Jersey in there as well. But first, we are going to start with New Jersey because this one was a little bit of a shocker because the margins were so much different than every poll had. And Spencer, what do you think about that? What happened here on this one when it was much bigger than what we thought it may be?
Exactly, Chris. We were looking at a competitive race here in New Jersey. We had it polling at 1 to 2 points for Cheryl.
Jack Ciattarelli and Mikey Sherrill.
Yeah, I apologize. Sometimes I jump into the weeds too quickly. But Republican Jack Ciattarelli had run before. He had lost by 3 points in the last race. And when we were looking at those early poll results, we looked at it very similar to what we were seeing from 2021, a neck-and-neck race. But then we started watching, and if you on the poll, you'll see that we're off by about 11 points. Sherrill is up, and Ciattarelli is lower than what we expected. But it was about Friday when I realized I was looking at their early returns, and the Democrats were voting at 52% turnout. Democrats make up 37% of the state. We expected them to have a higher turnout, around 40, 42%. But if it was over 50, that would explain why all of the polls underestimated the Sherrill victory between like 6 and 10 points, because the turnout on the Democratic side was substantially larger than expected.
I want to bring you in here. Talk to us about what you saw on the ground leading up to this really massive victory by Mikey Sherrill.
Yeah, look, I think along the way, when the poll came out and you had it at 1%, really, I think that was kind of what everybody was hearing on the ground. Democrats were extremely worried that Jack Ciattarelli was that close. Jack Ciattarelli's people were confident, and Republicans were confident that they were going to see the turnout. But I think what Spencer was talking about with the early returns is what we saw play out in real time on election night, right? Because we all anticipating it to be a very long night and potentially not even called like it was 4 years ago, that it may be called the next day or the day after. But a lot of these early returns were coming from what in New Jersey are notoriously red areas. And in those red areas, they were voting blue. And so that's why the race was called so early, because the ground game for Jack Ciattarelli was to really zero in on South Jersey, which is notoriously more red. And those early votes were all going to Mikey Sherrill. So I think that's potentially why it was called so early.
And let's focus on that one big factor, the movement in northern New Jersey with Hispanics. Spencer, talk to us about that.
Well, as we're going to talk about when we look at the national poll, the Trump numbers with Hispanic voters have shifted from where he was a year ago, essentially. And it looks like the Hispanic vote in New Jersey was the big shift towards Sherrill that Murphy didn't get in 21. And if that movement continues, then New Jersey will be a double-digit state moving forward in 28. And that was a very key indicator, not just in New Jersey, but potentially around the country, of what we're expecting to see with that Hispanic vote. That was the one that shifted in 24. Do they shift back to the Democrats in the midterms?
Before we go to New York, because that's going to be up next, Spencer, you mentioned something right off the top about how you look at your success. And there's two different ways, and share that with us so we can understand what you're thinking as we go through this.
The way I look at polls, there's two ways of determining if a poll is successful. There's statistical accuracy, and then there's predictive accuracy. Statistical accuracy is a poll is a range of scores, and you expect that the poll is going to fall within that range of scores. In this case, it fell outside that range of scores, so it doesn't pass the statistical accuracy. but it picked the winner, and that's the predictive accuracy. And that's what the general public wants to see is predictive accuracy. And I'll just say, this is the first year the Emerson poll has had 100% predictive accuracy in all of the polls that we did in 25. So while the statistical accuracy, that range of scores, was not as tight as I would like to see it, the predictive accuracy was very strong this year. And we did have Cheryl up in this race, but not obviously by the margins that she pulled it out by.
Right. We're going to go now to New York. And that's been a big race we've been tracking since this show started back in June. Against, well, it's basically a three-person race when at the end of the day. Former Governor Andrew Cuomo, the upstart but now progressive darling Zohran Mamdani, and then Curtis Sliwa, who everyone thought may throw a wrench in it, and it turns out he did not. So let's go to those numbers, Spencer. What'd you think? Because I think you kind of hit it out of the park.
Well, I felt good with Mamdani. That was what we were looking at. Can you get to the 50% mark? And that's what the polling was showing. The mistake we made here was not polling later. We should have polled on Sunday of the election. This was a week before the election. And generally, third-party candidates melt. We saw this out in like Oregon in the governor's race last year. There was a third-party candidate that was holding back Kotek. She melts at the end. Kotek wins. That similar thing happened here. I was watching the Sliwa vote. I thought it was locked in. We were looking at his voters, so I didn't think we needed to. But in hindsight, we should have gone back into the field on Sunday to see if that Sliwa vote was going to hold. It ends up melting and goes over to Cuomo, but it's not enough because we had Mamdani at 50 and he holds that 50.
And he has a majority. And Dan, what does getting above 50% mean for governing for Zohran Mamdani?
Oh, he needed that. He needed the 50% so he can say, I have a majority of New Yorkers, right? And you heard it in his speech. He came out that night and referenced mandate. I think he said the word mandate 5 times throughout his speech, that his win was a mandate for New York. Now, Andrew Cuomo came out and said, well, no, 50% isn't a mandate, and that he still has a long way to go. But I think that was a key number for him. Now, Spencer, if I can, I just, I spoken to you along the way about what Andrew Cuomo said in the primary, where he called this poll, your poll, an outlier. This go around, you predicted obviously that Zohran Mamdani was going to be the win, and of course, 2 a.m, I get a text message from the Andrew Cuomo campaign that said, well, Emerson was way off with 26 points, and I wrote back, well, they hit it at 50. They had it at 50% for Mamdani. Silence. So just what do you feel like you're going to get hit along the way on some of this?
Oh, sure. That's just part of the game. And it's okay. I mean, the campaigns have to advocate for themselves. So we're just part of that, the arena. And when you're in the arena, you're going to get hit, but you're going to hit back. And that's what we do. None of this is easy, but we always like to say we're from Boston. We don't do things because they're easy.
Well, let's go down to a race that was a little bit easier, I think, in this go around, which is Virginia. We've got that was a governor's race down there and an AG race, which was a little tighter. And governor's race, Abigail Spanberger, the Democrat, won, as well as Jay Jones, the Democrat, who had some controversy along the way when this race was going on. But the numbers for both races, you were pretty close.
Yeah, we felt pretty good with the Virginia numbers. So we wait, remember, just like New Jersey. Now, the difference between Virginia and New Jersey is party registration versus party affiliation. In New Jersey, you register as a member of a party or you're unaffiliated, independent. In Virginia, you just register to vote. So the difference between these polls is we don't wait by turnout of party. And you can see the polling was much stronger in Virginia, holding that race within about 3 points of the actual results. And in that attorney general race, that poll was the surprise poll of up to that point. All of the polling had Mayoral as the Republican winning that race until this one came out. Then we saw a bit of a swing. But I would say that the polling here in the state of Virginia was pretty strong overall. It was that AG race where what's really interesting there is very little melt. So the same people that voted for Spanberger, they also voted for Jones. There was only about 40 or 50,000 that didn't vote in that AG race, and that made those numbers more consistent.
Yeah, there was 100,000 people who did split, 127,000, I think, who did split tickets, but that wasn't nearly enough to get Jason Mayoral over the top. We do have a quick little report from Virginia from our own Andy Fox at Wavy TV. Let's go to that and see what Andy's saying about the races.
Hello, Chris and Spencer. Here in Virginia, it was not a blue wave, it was a blue tsunami. But Democrats end up winning governor, lieutenant governor, even state attorney general Jake Jones running. He even survived that texting scandal. In the House of Delegates, Don Scott, the Speaker of the House, picked out 14 Republicans to take down. He won 13 of them. He says, we now have to listen to the voters and what they said. Republicans, they realize now, quoted as saying, we are on the outside looking in, and we were wishing there were more of a check and balance, but not this time around. Democrats, clear control. Governor Youngkin said yesterday it absolutely had something to do with a shutdown of the federal government, obviously blaming Republicans and President Donald Trump. Now, what happens? The governing. How are these two, centrist governor and a progressive-leaning House of Delegates, how are they going to get along? That's what everyone's going to be watching. That's the latest from Portsmouth. Chris and Spencer, back to you.
Parents, that's what a reporter looks like on Red. So we love Andy Fox. I love his energy. He's got Zohran Mandami energy this morning here as we record PPR. Spencer, any thoughts on Andy's analysis?
Yeah, it was a good night for the Democrats, and the question is this going to carry out? I think the Jay Jones victory is an indicator that Democrats were willing to hold their nose and still vote for their party. And come the midterms, this might be an indication of more to come.
All right, now let's go all the way across America and go to California, where Prop 50, the redistricting gerrymandering proposition, was on the ballot, championed by Gavin Newsom and supported by Arnold Schwarzenegger, but not as full-throated as many Republicans thought he should have. And we saw that in the results. Spencer?
Yeah, exactly. We were expecting a 20-point race or so, and that's about what we got. Maybe it's going to get up to 28, which is a strong sign for the Democrats. But it looked like the Republicans kind of threw in the towel on this one, didn't spend much money. And with that, the Democrats just kind of cruised to victory. The repercussions of it is obviously redistricting, and we'll see what happens to really the 5 Republicans that they're targeting here.
But the Hispanics in New Jersey drifting back to the Democrats, that does talk about, does raise the question, the specter of Texas and its decision to redistrict, because many of those districts are Hispanic majority districts, and it may give them pause. But before we talk about that, let's go to Nikki Lorenzo, our political anchor in Sacramento, to give us a quick recap on what she's seeing from that race.
Big win out here in California for Governor Newsom and the Yes on Prop 50 campaign. Just to give you guys an idea of the landscape, what it was like on election night. So polls closed at 8 o'clock. The AP called the race at 8:01. As it sits right now, the Yes side has 64% of the vote. That is expected to climb as more ballots are being counted. Kamala Harris got 71% turnout here in the presidential election. So what does that mean? Governor Newsom was able to turn out the base. The no side really didn't have a cohesive campaign. They were in 2 different camps. Governor Schwarzenegger did not hit the campaign trail, and they just really didn't have a great message, and they didn't raise the money that former Speaker Kevin McCarthy said he was going to raise. What about these 5 Republicans are being targeted? They say they are running. We don't know what districts they are going to run in yet, but we know that the national arm, all the fundraising that the national party is going to have to do in order to try to save these Republicans, and it costs a lot of money to run races out here. What does this mean for Governor Newsom now? Okay, he has a lot of momentum. This raises his national profile as he gets ready to run for president in 2028.
Well, she just referenced Governor Newsom, and we're going to get to some Newsom numbers here in the next segment, so stick around. But I do want, Spencer, you to address the specter of the Hispanic vote and where it's going to end up a year from now. What do you think?
I'm thinking it's moving back to the left. And the Hispanic vote has been a vote that both parties have been courting for a long time. And the Republicans made some really big inroads back with George Bush in 2000, 2004, and then with Donald Trump in 2020. Big inroads with that Hispanic vote, but that seems to have bounced, or in 24, that seems to have bounced back in this off-year election. And now as we look into those midterms, can the Democrats win back that Hispanic vote? And as you mentioned, Texas and these other states that have these congressional districts, that could be the swing vote that decides the power of the Congress.
Mm-hmm. Well, everyone, we've got brand new polling. Spencer does not slow down. That machine keeps moving. Brand new polling, national polling that you're going to want to see. So some of these trends are going to be very interesting as we head into 26. So stick around. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to Political Power Ranker. We just went through Spencer's results against the actual results, and his predictive analysis was 5 for 5, so home run for Spencer. But now we're going to look at some new polling, a national polling that you were doing in the midst of everything else. So, Spencer, let's talk the very first slide, which is Trump favorability.
Yeah, the President Trump's approval, disapproval rating, we've got to track it over the course of the year, and you can see it has totally flipped from 49-41 approve to now 49-41 disapprove. And as you look at what has flipped within these numbers, we were talking about it in the first segment, that Hispanic vote. They were a +9 back in January. Now they're a -14. So what they're saying is we're not happy with what we're seeing. He's also lost ground with the male vote that he was really dominating. So we're going to see over the next year if the president is able to win back some of those supporters or if this trend continues, which would probably spell bad news for the Republicans in the midterms.
Dan, what are you hearing on the streets of, now it's New York City, mind you, I understand that, and New Jersey, but what are you hearing and seeing about Donald Trump and his poll numbers and, just basically dealing with politicians out east?
Yeah, what's really interesting, you keep bringing up the Latino vote, and in particular in New Jersey, that's a big voting block, specifically in Passaic County, and they did vote red in previous elections, and this go around didn't. And so I happen to live in New Jersey and talk to a number of folks who are both Democrats and Republicans, and I think that the Mikey Sherrill win, by the way, with the amount of numbers we saw, wasn't necessarily because she was the best candidate. I think it was a lot of anti-Trump. And people who were saying, I didn't want to vote for Jack Ciattarelli because I didn't fully support Donald Trump and some of the moves that were happening. I think for the Latino vote, particularly in New Jersey, who may have voted red last time, aren't happy with the immigration policies and specifically ICE, and are looking at that and looking at affordability and saying, well, we're not winning on that. So it didn't work for us. We tried it, and now they're going to go back to the other side. In New York City, it's a different ballgame. It's heavily, heavily Democrat. And so I'm not surprised that the numbers for Donald Trump's disapproval are going up. What I am surprised about is where his stronghold was on Staten Island. Folks didn't vote for Curtis Lewa, and they are not necessarily happy with the Republican Party right now because of the shutdown. So I'm not sure how much of that is playing into it. A lot of those folks in red Staten Island voted for Andrew Cuomo.
What's interesting, too, is we've got some purple districts in the New York City area that'll be up for Congress in 26. And how all this will play out, including, Donald Trump's favorability rating. If it still is around the 41%, that will have impacts on the Michael Allers of the world as he tries to retain that seat in a very purple district there. Spencer, let's talk about that. Let's talk about D's and R's. You've got another slide to show us.
Well, we got the midterm elections, so let's look at that generic ballot test. And you can see that the Democrats have just held their vote at 44%. It's the Republicans that dropped their support this month. So what that tells me is that those voters are now looking at the Democrats. Generally, voters don't just switch R to D or D to R. There's like a cooling off period where they step back. And if you look at some of the Trump approval, his disapproval number would drop and then the approval would drop. So it kind of goes hand in glove in that way. When we do look at that ballot test, the Democrats are inching up to a 4-point lead. And remember, it's a 5-seat lead for the Republicans right now, 220 to 215. So if 3 seats switch, that's what changes the power of the Congress. And it looks like the Democrats are in a strong position a year out.
Oh, my goodness. Dan, what are you thinking? What do you think the Michael Allers of the world are thinking right now?
I think that they are trying to figure out their footing right now, and Mike Lawler himself was very, very pro Trump and is now taking a little bit of a step back from some of the things, including the government shutdown, right? And I think a few of the Democrats who may have, Republicans, excuse me, who have gone full MAGA are now looking at it saying, was that the right move? And there are some purple districts, like Mike Lawler's seat. There's a seat in New Jersey that folks are looking at now, saying, well, Democrats need to pounce, but they need to put the right candidate forward. And so I think the struggle right now for Democrats looking at numbers like these is, do they do that and go centrist, like Spanberger or Sherrill, or do they go more progressive, more like a Mamdani? I think that's the footing and the things that they're looking at over the next year.
Well, to Dan's point, you got to go. The Democrats, their takeaway from the off year is the centrist is the lane to go in. Even Cuomo almost wins that election through that centrist lane, and we'll see if they take that lesson and run with it. I know up in Maine we have a contest on the Democratic side for the Senate seat, which is pitting an establishment versus a progressive, and we'll see which direction the party goes there. But to me, the big takeaway in that off year was seeing how that centrist of Spanberger, Sherrill was able to play out. Even Newsom's rollout in California, they all punched above their weight. So that's the type of response I expect to see the Democrats continue to play that game plan. We'll see what the Republicans are able to do, because the Cettarelli game plan of hugging up with Trump did not play out. And obviously, Winsome Earl Sears, I'm not even sure what that relationship was with Trump, but that certainly didn't work out either, as she lost by 15 points.
And I didn't support her. I'm not even sure he called her by her name when he said she's a good candidate.
Exactly.
That's as far as he went.
Yeah, but so you can't say that he held her back. But on the flip side, without his support, she doesn't have a pathway to victory. So to Dan's point, these Republicans, they have to figure out, how do you thread that needle with supporting Trump and being able to win over some of those independents that are a little more skeptical of the policies.
Paul Glenn Youngkin, he found that path pretty well back in 21.
And he does leave office popular. That's what makes Winsome Earl Sears' loss so surprising. He was a +10 in our poll that had Spanberger winning by +12. So you can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater on that one. And you got to say he is popular, and we'll see what his plans are over the next 2 to 4 years.
Right. There is there's a Senate race coming up there too. So in 26. So that will be interesting. All right. Motivated to vote slide. What do you got here?
This is what we saw on Tuesday. The Democrats are about 10 points higher than the Republicans, and the independents, they're kind of stepping back. So when we talked about in New Jersey, that big Democratic push where it looks like they're going to get over 50% of the vote is registered Democrats, it's the independents who didn't come out. The Republicans still voted at about 30%, and Cettarelli got the vote that people thought he was going to get, his total vote. The difficulty is that Sherrill's side came out at a much larger pace, and that these numbers suggest nationally more of the same, which again would be good news for the Democrats and a concern for the Republicans.
But if one thing about the Democrats in New Jersey who came out to vote, and correct me if I'm wrong, Spencer, a lot of folks I was talking to said that they came out to vote this time because, again, they were very anti-Trump. They not necessarily liked Mikey Sherrill. In the last election, they stayed home for Kamala Harris. It wasn't that they didn't want to, they just didn't want to support the candidate. And then same thing for Phil Murphy 4 years ago. They necessarily didn't like Phil Murphy, but they didn't feel like they were in a danger, so they stayed home. This go around, I think everybody realized, well, they have to go out to vote because they were fearing the Republican Party was going to come out and vote stronger. But I think they had a louder voice to say, well, we want to vote against Trump.
And we see that actually in the next slide. So as we pull that up, where's your motivation to vote? It was either to support the president or to oppose the president. You can see Democrats are very similar to the independents. They're voting to oppose President Trump's agenda, while the Republicans are voting to support the president's agenda. And the concern for the Republicans is that the independents are 2-1 in opposition of it. So while the president's agenda is popular within his base, it's not very popular with the independents, that swing vote. And that's where the Democrats can find a pathway to victory, perhaps an upset in a state like Ohio, where the senators should have a fairly easier run, but that's going to become competitive if independents are voting against Trump policies and not for them.
There are a bunch of Senate races that are going to be critical in 26 that Trump's influence, whether positive or negative, is going to have an impact. North Carolina, Texas, Ohio, you mentioned. You've got New Hampshire with John Sununu jumping in.
You got Maine.
Yeah, in Maine.
Georgia.
So,
and listen, that Georgia race, the Democrats won on Tuesday 60-40 in a statewide race that they should not be winning. So that's another indicator that the Democratic turnout is much stronger. It's percolating, and we saw it come to a boil on Tuesday. My thought is this is what we're going to see in 26.
And what does the administration do to moderate this boiling pot of maybe frustration of the Democratic voter out there to have them become less interested? And we'll have to wait to see if that happens or if they can make that happen. So
yeah, I think the Dreamers Act, I think dealing with the Hispanic vote is going to be key on immigration. And we'll see if the Republicans and Trump can do something there to try to win back that vote. Because if they allow that vote to continue to go where it's going this year, they're going to have a really tough, way to win in 26 and in 28.
All right. We have to move on. Time is running out on our show. I know we could talk about this for hours on end with the three of us, but we got to move on because the best part of the segment each week is who's up and who's down, and we'll be right back with that. Dan, you can... All right, welcome back to Political Power Ranker. Our favorite part of each week is who's up and who's down. Per Spencer Kimball, the savant of Boston. Spencer, who's up and who's down?
Well, this week we looked at the Democratic Party as an upswing. They came in, their favorability is 10 points lower than the Republicans. They have a 35% favorable. Republicans are 45% favorable, yet they got their vote out, and it looks like they're very motivated coming into the midterm, so we put them up this week.
And Dan, who do you have up this week?
Mikey Sherrill is up because she won by double digits, not just a slim margin. She won double digits. Who's down is Andrew Cuomo.
Oh, hang on. Let Spencer go first. Hang on, we'll come back to you. We got to get the graphic going. The show has an order, Dan.
Got excited.
Spencer, who's up or who's down? I'm sorry.
So we got those Democrats up. On the downside is President Trump. His approval number is down 8 points from where it was a year ago. The Republican Party is struggling to get out their vote, and it'll be interesting to see how he's able to rally the party and the independents back to his side over the next year or so as we go into the midterms.
Dan, we've got 20 seconds. Tell me who's up on your or down on your end.
Jack Ciattarelli and Andrew Cuomo. They are down because they're not just they lost, they are done. I don't think they come back into public office.
And that's Dan Manarino's analysis, or Dan Marino, as I heard you were called the other day. I don't think you're a star quarterback. You're a star political reporter right here in New York City for us. Awesome. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Dan, thanks for being with us along the way since June. This is terrific. I know it takes time. Everyone, thanks for watching again, and we will see you next week. We'll have fresh polling. Spencer's pulling out the old drawing board, and we're going to have new stuff next week, so please tune in. See you then.